away then. I got my mask in my hand, I should put it on. Thanks for the refreshments, that was a treat. So this is just a workshop. And the first thing on the agenda is to review Robert's rules.
So
He
you guys,
supplied us with a wonderful
yeah,
PowerPoint, so
we'll go through this and really stop me and we can talk about any part of it. It was really a lesson for me to just look at the broad topic. It's, you know, we don't have this adopted as a rules right now, call them parliamentary rules. Okay, it's not that late at all. Grab some Italian bakery and join.
Perfect, thank you.
So again, broad overview, this is according to, you know, things that I found from the book publisher. Maybe things we want to do differently, we can, but it at least defines things and kind of looks at the structure that we want to do and, you know, what falls under this and what doesn't. So again, it might not be perfect, but just, I always thinking right from the beginning, what kind of group are we? Are we a nonprofit? Are we a quasi-public? And it only really is established from that interlocal agreement. And we have bylaws that are part of that agreement. So we're not a nonprofit by ourselves. And so there's definitely advantages to partnering with nonprofits from grant standpoints and a lot of other things, but I don't think we've ever even thought about it. We're just really from the interlocal agreement, but not a nonprofit entity in itself. So then, because we hadn't had workshops for a while, just wanted to take a minute to kind of say, okay, what are our regular meetings and what's in a workshop? So again, the workshop that we're doing today is just meant to look at topics deeper. You know, no voting takes place. There's no questions from the public, although they're welcome to be here. It's still going to always be video and documented. There'll be minutes, and Mike's still going to do that for us. As opposed to our regular meetings, which is to conduct the business of the organization. Official motions and voting are all done in regular meetings. Questions are allowed from the public, and again, it's documented. So, you know, kind of looking at pieces that kind of flow from that. I found it interesting to look a little bit at the history. Where did this come from? It was some Army officer who was working with groups, and just like even we'll talk about in the you know, the details of this. To table something means something completely opposite in other countries than it does here. So working in the Army field is that you've got people from all over the place, and there was no structure. Even words mean something different sometimes. So that was the premise of this, was to start it in 1876, for goodness sake, you guys. It was called the Pocket Manual of Rules of Order, the Deliberative Assembly. Short word, Robert's Rules of Order. And so this is Robert. Again, it's just about procedures for the meeting. You know, we got our bylaws that tells us what we can do. And again, anything legal, we ask for our legal assistance. We're gonna get a copy of this, and so if you look at, you know, what here has come out of this is excerpts from it, from the website. It's the 12th edition. I found it kind of interesting who they have on their team to revise them. Like, there's a pretty diverse group of historians, mathematicians, politicians, you know, writers. So it's quite a diverse group that actually is hired to, from this association to update this. So glad to have that, and it's very organized, so I think it's reliable, it's dependable, and I think it's got a good background of people who actually put it together. Parliamentary procedures, I learned how to spell parliamentary. We're going, okay, what are they referring to? So it's anybody with rules, ethics, and customs governing meetings of a deliberative assembly. I'm going, what's a deliberative assembly? Okay, that's us, anybody who ever uses these rules. So it's kind of that whole piece of an assembly is an old word, older-fashioned word that was used. Associations, you know, what do those all have in common? And again, it's rules, ethics, and customs, and the rules of a meeting. The rules of the majority with respect to the minority. And I think that's an important principle that it always talks about, is that everybody has a voice, and that, you know, it's okay to debate something, it's just where does it land, and that's the majority of the group. So there's lots of little pieces of that's where its foundation is sort of based in, which I like that. And there are other options. I've never seen any of these other options, but there are. And like I said, maybe some are more popular in other countries, because in America, 85 to 95% of the United States uses Robert's Rules. Some version of it. you know, so there are others.
Every year in town meeting floor, the first thing we do is adopt Robert's Rules of Parliamentary Procedure.
Yeah.
I think it was ever challenged, I don't think anybody in the room would come up with the
I know.
the book.
Does anyone else have any familiarity with using any of these others? Riddick's, have you ever heard of that one, or? It's always
I
been.
feel like I've heard of Riddick's, but I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted people to know, there are other options, but they're not all that popular, and, you know, we'll see whether this one meets our needs. So the guide and conducting meetings, the purpose of this book is to enable an assembly of any size, you have 3 people to 500 people, with due regard for every member's opinion, again, that whole respect for all opinions, and arrive at a general will, what's the majority want, and get the maximum amount of questions in the least amount of time, and then the combination of all of those. So when we're at a regular meeting and there's something that we want to discuss further, that's we say, you know, I recommend that we do a workshop about that. You know, because sometimes I feel like we need to stay on track to what our meeting schedule time is. And you don't know how deep you're gonna get into a topic until you're in it. So we find a way, and what's the right way to say, hey, you know, can we do a workshop about this? Or, you know, what's the right way to say that in a formal meeting? But I love the purpose in general. Based on the rights of the majority, of the minority, of the individual, of the absentees, and all of these together. So kind of gives me that reminder of, you know, getting something on an agenda and having that prep material for all of us to review. If somebody isn't here, we don't really have a way for somebody to vote as an absentee. And that's part of your bylaws, and we don't have it in our bylaws. But something to think about, you know, because I think it's not mandatory attendance, everybody's here voluntarily, but everybody's voice does matter. Can you send a proxy? I mean, I've done that with the board that I was on, when it was actually one of the rules where you could send somebody as your proxy. Or you could allow their vote to come in over the internet, right? As an email. So we haven't really dealt very much with, you know, absentee voices being in here. So that's kind of a thing to think about. Different types of meeting, our regular meetings, we got 5 of those. Special meeting would be, you know, for a special topic or a specific circumstance. A lot of organizations only have an annual meeting. That's what I was looking at for nonprofits, so they have to, if that's the rules of the nonprofit, that you have at least 1 meeting, or any association or sorority or any of those groups has at least 1 meeting. So we don't typically hold an annual meeting. We elect offices annually, but it's not really considered an annual meeting. And then executive session, and what's the rules around that, and that came from the main legislator. We'll look at that a little closer. Public sessions, of course, the public is open to these meetings, they're open to, you know, the documentation of them. We want to hear from people who are interested to be here and to send us comments if they couldn't be here. And then, of course, we've had a lot of Zoom meetings. And, you know, looking at the year ahead, and the city has adopted either in-person or Zoom. Kind of that's where we stand, because we didn't adopt a policy about having Zoom meetings, so hopefully we don't have to do that. So executive sessions, I knew all about that. I didn't really know it's based for the main legislator, and you have to say in accordance with MRSA 504, 405. So of course, I went and looked at that. You know, and I'm familiar with it's a personnel issue, it's a litigation issue, it's purchasing land. There's 2 or 3 others in there too. But it has to follow one of those categories to be private, and that's because, you know, you're excluding the public. So it's not for the betterment of the whole group. But it's, you know, not trying to be a secret meeting. But that's, you know, that's not based in our bylaws, that's, you know, state law. And then decision-making is a big piece. How do we vote? How do we make decisions? And again, we talked before about how it was informal in the past, about how you just was unanimous consensus. You talked about something that wasn't formally voted on, which is really not part of our bylaws, because our bylaws says the majority vote will be sufficient for valid action of the board, page 8. So it says that you have to do that process. But Robert rules say that you can have more relaxed version. Okay, so you can integrate that in just by adopting Robert's rules to be able to do unanimous consensus. So you can merge the 2, which is good, I think, to consider, because I think in the end we end up probably having some hybrid of maybe not being too formal with all the different motions, and, you know, just, you know, not having any formality. But majority vote or consensus are the 2 ways to get to a decision. The consent agenda is something I had added to the new layout, because I think sometimes, all you need to do is see it and approve it officially. Might be something we talked about in a workshop, it might be, like I know we had presented a proposal to do some work, we'd seen it beforehand. If you wanna take something off a consent agenda, all you need to do is ask. And so that should be the first part of our agenda, is that this is a presenting the agenda, here's the consent agenda, is there anybody who'd like to take any of those items off the consent agenda? So that means it can be discussed. But that's a process that we should add in with the new agenda, because there will be things that can be easily voted for. And we wanna save time, because again, the meeting is about the most questions, least amount of time. What's the efficiency? And then, again, use it for when it's appropriate. But it doesn't exclude somebody from taking it off the agenda if they feel like they wanna discuss it. And that comes back to the individual person's, everybody's opinion matters. So, I don't know if anybody, was real clear about the consent agenda idea. Whoops, sorry, what happened? Okay, what's a quorum for us? A majority of the membership? If you don't have the majority, there's some limited activity that you can do and vote on. You need a majority to vote, basically. But our attendance is voluntary, so you can see where sometimes, I don't know if it has in the past, been a problem where you don't have a quorum and you can't vote on something. So I think it would be helpful to us, Stephen, to think a little bit more about absenteeism-ish, like how to let people vote. But it hasn't, I don't know, in our history, has it been a problem?
Concerns in the past,
Yeah,
and usually Sid will make a phone call,
yeah,
saying coming or not.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
so we've always,
Mhm.
as far as I know.
I don't ever remember a quorum issue with this
Good.
commission.
Good.
Oh.
But
Excellent.
the bylaws do state a quorum,
Yeah, they do state that, yeah.
which is how many?
The majority.
Oh, just the majority.
Just the majority. I forget which direction I'm going. So let's make a motion, what does that take? Making the motion, seconding the motion, open the discussion to the board, then it goes to the public, and then if the public mentions something that you want to then discuss with the board, you come back to the board again, and we'll always have the last discussion. And then, putting the motion to vote, and then announcing the results in the end. Repeating the motion and saying it passed or failed, whatever, 5-0, 7-2, whatever it is, So two different types of motions, and then this gets into some details, but I tried to give a little bit of details without a lot of detail. So the main motion is always your first one. It needs to be seconded, it is amendable, you can amend it, a vote is required by the majority. But then there's lots of choices on the secondary motions, and you do them without thinking about which motion it is, but they all have different pieces to them that I'll describe just a little bit. So the subsidiary motion, you're gonna use every once in a while, you're gonna amend something. Okay, we'll talk about postponing indefinitely a little bit in more detail, because that's, could be common. Postpone to a certain time, those are very similar. Refer or commit, limit or extended times of a debate, previous question, lay on the table. So the ones that I thought that were really important is how the tabling and how to refer something to a different time period is something that is most likely, so I expanded on those ones a little bit. But that's a general definition. And then, so a privilege motion is fix a time to adjourn, recess, raise a question of privilege, call for orders of the day. And we're going to take a recess to go into executive session, and then of course we're closing the meeting, but otherwise, let's see a lot of details on that one. Yeah, privilege and then the incidental. Incidental is a lot of different scenarios that relate to the main motion. But we did that cheat sheet as a second thing, because which ones would we really be doing, What would we be using the most? We don't need a big, book of rules of how we're gonna say something, because then it just feels too sticky. And we're not trying to catch somebody and saying something wrong, we're just trying to be able to document it in a structured way that we know that everyone's been heard mostly. So when people say table, that's what the one I was saying earlier, is that it means complete opposite in other countries. For us, we think it's taking it off the table, in other countries, it's putting it on the table. So in the end, it's preferable not to use that, and there's other things that you can use. But when you lay something on the table, it's necessary to suspend consideration of the main motion to deal with an unexpected matter, commonly intended to kill, really. Usually misused to table something, okay? And then to take it from the table is after you've laid it on the table at a different time, you're taking it back off. But there's a better way. Oops, sorry. Postpone indefinitely, that's to kill a motion. And again, there's the rules of, do you need it seconded, do you need it debated, was it the majority vote? And then postpone to a certain time, to the next meeting, to after they finish the study. So once construction's done, you can postpone it to a specific time. So I think we would use those. I think that, could be very common with feeling like you didn't get enough of a background, or we wanna do some more research on something. So I'm not sure, any more depth of that, of why these are better than tabling something. But I know when I hear the word tabling something or killing it in general, is it can't come back on ever. Well, it can, depends, what your rules are. But I thought there was one that you voted something and you defeated it. Is that the one where it's like a whole year before you can put it back on the agenda if you have Robert's rules in the strict version? Dan, I'm looking at you.
That may
Not
be,
sure.
yeah, I do
Anybody?
not recall it.
Yeah. I can't remember
So
that.
the advantage to using postpone,
Yeah.
so to lay on the table, if you were to lay something on the table, it stays there. And often what a body will do is they will table to a date certain, which is essentially to postpone to a certain time.
Right. Yeah.
And postponing is a little bit different in that you might postpone until, you might postpone it to a later time during even the same meeting.
Yeah.
Whereas to table something, if you're tabling it to a certain date, you are almost never taking it back off the table during that same meeting, you are postponing it to a specific date. However, if you simply table something, it may be taken off the table by motion at any time at any subsequent meeting. So that is often why it can be used to kill things.
Right.
But it's really only used to kill things when someone who is voting, so let's say there's a minority that wants something to happen and the majority tables it. So now to pull that off the table, someone from that majority is gonna have to pull it off the table at a later date. So it's unlikely to ever come off the table, but it's possible for it to happen. So that's sort of like that difference between the postponing and the tabling.
So for the most part, we'd want to do the postponing. Unless there's a required, it seems almost vindictive to do a tabling and a battle thing. We don't want to ever be in a battle.
Like, I could say that in the decade on the planning board, we almost never use a postpone, we almost always use a table. Specifically a tabling to a date certain.
Do you know if the planning board adopted the Roberts rules?
So what the planning board did is we adopted a specific section of Robert's rules.
Yeah.
But we adopted the section specific to motions, but not specific to meeting order. So, for instance, when we take a topic, we actually open up to the public prior to any motions being made. So in that sense, we don't follow Robert's rules, but because we have it spelled out in our bylaws how that works, that we're allowed to defer to that. So.
Yeah. Do you think it works better?
What?
Hearing from the public first?
I think for what we do, it does sometimes.
Because of land use and
Right, and
we
so
got about some people there, property owners.
it's helpful. It is helpful because it helps us to inform the motion. So we don't workshop. We don't do, for instance, like the city council in Lewiston an hour in bulk. They will workshop items before something comes to a vote. So if you were watching that meeting, there will be an order and a motion will be made to accept the order, right? But there's no, you're not getting information on what that order was, or if you did not watch the workshop, you will have no idea what they're talking about. Whereas the planning board does not workshop items ahead of time. Part of that is because of expediency. It doesn't make sense for us to tell a developer, you need to workshop this month and then come back next month, right?
Yeah.
So,
Good one, makes it done in there.
but because we essentially workshop an item, so essentially what we are doing is workshopping an item, then holding a public hearing, but because of the way we set up our rules, it's all wrapped into one.
Like with anybody that's here for our, commission things, is we move their comments up front, and that's whether it's related to the agenda or not, they're just public comments, right, at the very beginning. So kind of moving that up in our agenda was kind of one of the comments that we had from before, but I think that for what we discuss, I think it seems to make some sense to kind of follow the regular routine, even if we adopt it or don't adopt it, I just think of having the idea, you think, what's the structure? Are you coming back to discuss it again later? Are you clarifying in the end what happened? So to adopt parts or the whole of this is that, our bylaws don't define our meeting standards. It is, the most commonly known for people coming and going and any new members. And even people, all of us are in the other groups, kind of some consistency. And then the equity and inclusion of all voices and making sure all voices are heard and having that be part of the structure, I like. The downside of not adopting anything is just, not being as efficient, kind of wasting time. In the Roberts Rules book, it's saying the chair can unilaterally impose a result. I'm not sure how that would happen for us. But most importantly, I think, is the majority may impose a result that frequently disregards the rights of the minority. I think that's an important piece, that we want to make sure all voices are always heard, no matter what process we have. Because that's why we have everybody on this committee. So even if an organization adopts part of Robert's Rules or Robert's Rules in general, they can still do their own rules that supersede. And it's mostly just being clear about what you're doing. And so we looked at, like I was just looking into these notes about proxy voting at that time. I ran a nonprofit that was a 501(c), so we had that all written in it, but we don't have anything on the whole proxy voting. So what I did with these last two slides is just kind of talk a little bit about the rules itself, and then what questions do we have? And kind of just started this conversation, and think that's, kind of where we're at. Any comments? And there is questions that weren't answered. There's a ton of depth in this to different things that you can do or not do, but some things don't even fall under Robert's Rules. Like we've always had the question, how do you get an item on the agenda? In coming up with that clear plan of, as it goes to staff, it gets reviewed, doesn't even, do both of you guys want to review that agenda before it gets put out? How long do we keep it within a 2-hour meeting? Those are all rules we can make that we haven't made yet, that, to kind of look at a list. And then what would fall under Robert's Rules is how do I continue a topic at a future meeting? If an item is defeated, can it come back on the agenda? And if this is something that we want to do, I really want to have, one of the staff people, and I've talked to Kevin about this, being the one that finds the answer. It comes back to the group and says, this is what the answer was to this protocol. And for even our own rules, that at every meeting agenda, it's something that, how do I do this? Kevin's got the rules, so that we have one person that has the clarity on we create a new rule if we needed to, but can always clarify what's the process to do something that we need to do so that it stays consistent, I guess, and fair, obviously. So, what are people's thoughts in general about adopting something, I guess? I haven't seen the book to adopt certain sections of it, but Kevin had done this little chart on just how you ask for things in a Robert's Rules meeting. What are some of the things that we want, like making a motion, is that something that we want to be part of this? We've always, started the meeting and adjourned the meeting by just simple protocols, but that's part of Robert's Rules as well. So you can see there's lots of different pieces in here that may not have ever affected us, right? Sending it to another agenda item, but I think if we keep it somewhere in the middle, it makes some sense. So in general, what other questions did people have for protocols? Because that kind of helps look at, do we need more of this side, or we need to spend more time on coming up with our own rules? I just kind of wanted to write some of those down if we could. Like, I pulled a few low-hanging fruit out of there because I know that people have these questions. But besides, like the agenda, who reviews it, and I think we need to have answers for all those, and we can discuss how we do that, but what's another burning thing that's just like, how do you do this? is there something on your mind that you're thinking of that, as a structure?
One thing that, it's not a burning question to me, but I've heard many ways to come out of executive session.
Mhm.
And the last impression I got from this group is you just come out. Where some people vote, I make a motion to come out of executive session, so
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that.
yeah. But, I mean, executive session is an extremely important one, for sure.
On the Lewiston Council, we've typically just taken a motion, show of hands, and that's it, like for adjourning or leaving executive session. I don't know how that is here, but that's how that's worked on the Lewiston Council.
Say that again now?
Like, at the end of the executive session,
Yeah.
someone will just make a motion to adjourn or to leave executive session, someone seconds it, and then it's not a roll call vote, it's just a show of hands.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
99.99% of the time, it's just a unanimous vote, because everything's done.
Well,
Just making sure everybody's paying attention, I guess, too.
I've seen that many times over, but then I got the impression from people in this group that when the executive session is over, you just come out. So I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
'Cause-
I do it like you described.
Yeah. I would say that's a good way to do it. I don't know if that's a bylaws or specific Robert's Rules thing, but that's just a straightforward, still easy way just to do it.
That would be a good one to answer, because I was always under the impression that you can't vote in executive session.
Right.
So taking a motion, a second, and then a vote, it's not supposed to, I can't record that in the minutes, because you're still in executive session. So we've always just recorded that, oh, at this time, you are now out of executive session. That would be a good one to clarify.
Yeah.
Well, its intent must be that everybody's ready, you know, like, again, that whole everybody's opinion is heard, is everybody good with the topic we're talking, I'm sorry, let's go back in. So I think it's.
I don't know if it's like an official vote as much
Yeah.
as just a, literally just, yeah, we want to get out of here, let's go.
Yeah, we're done, and everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Doesn't have to be burning, doesn't have to be burning. Just in general. And even, you know, like, the agenda itself, so let's just talk about that for a minute, because we don't have any workshops planned, but we'll discuss kind of topics on that, and how to, even what's on the agenda, you know, say that there's 16 things on there. How do we decide which ones are the most important, or you stay till they're all done, or, you know, kind of group some together? How would we want to do that? Because I've had a few meetings run long.
We've had some workshops, the last one I recall is out on the Witten Spring Road with the
Yeah, that's
forester.
right, Forestry, that was awesome.
Very
Trips are good.
informative.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. You know, it's eye-opening because you look at, oh, we're gonna do this to make some money, and he looks at it, no, we're gonna do this to protect the watershed, so that, you know.
Mhm.
you
Yeah, different
focus on-
perspectives, for sure. And, you know, we're doing some forestry on some city lands too, and I continue to learn, you know, like one time the tree is not good, or, you know, or letting it see that it's messy in the field, that it's supposed to decompose in the place. But yeah, in account for the agenda and coming up with that, we can clarify that.
So first, with the Robert's Rules, do we
Right.
want, I mean, is our goal today to say we are adopting Robert's Rules, or we are adopting a section of it, and we will have these additional rules that we will follow? I mean, is that what the intent that we
Well,
want to
it's a
get?
workshop, so really it's, if there's more information that you want staff to get, Mary Ann put this together, I think it's great, but if there's other, you know, some people come with different experiences, so it's a good common base that we can start off, but if there's a certain direction the majority wants to go, we can put some work to it, or, but I would expect you to take it up at the next meeting, if you chose to go with it. Officially in the handout, or the big manual that you guys should have in your handbook, it says that majority of the board shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business, and a majority vote of such quorum shall be sufficient for a valid action by the board. So, that's what we have for now.
It's pretty short.
It's also pretty odd that it's, the majority is the quorum, and then once you've reached quorum, all you need is
Majority of the
majority,
Majority.
because on most boards and committees, you'll find there's quorum, then if all you have is quorum, you can only act by unanimous vote. So, that was, I remember reading through that one and thinking like, wow, you could have quite a,
I know.
you really don't have to
Percent of
have
the
the
percent?
majority,
Yeah.
you really don't have to have the majority of board
So,
members
so
actually voting for
nine
something.
members?
Yeah, so majority would be 5, and then the majority of a quorum would be 3.
Would be three, so
Yeah,
three people
Yeah.
So you,
could determine action of the board.
as it reads now.
Yeah, but with most others, it would be, okay, so your quorum is your majority, but now if a unanimous vote is required to take action.
I've seen it as, it's been majority of members present, and that's what I thought was the standard. And then if, at least with Robert's rules, if there is, something like that does happen, then 3 people decided it, it's 2/3 can retake that over, which would be the rest of the board in this case.
Yeah, yeah, there's all different kinds of ways,
Yeah.
it's, but,
Yeah, it seems crazy that 3 people would be able to decide
And I
out of
think,
9.
probably just to say something obvious, but to restate it sometimes helps. The original group of commissioners were established, they were all negotiated through the interlocal, and they were all on board and had this history of what would happen if they did it on their own, and then came together in this big collaborative. And then what we're seeing now with Heather being one of the last original, not a commissioner, but members of the founding board, there's a lot of change, and you guys are all coming in all new, and that history's not there. So as you get all these diversities, I think we're just trying to address how do we deal with things in the future, because it has been pointed out that it was very informal. It was at I got the feeling that people thought it was too informal.
With it, so I think it's a lot to change the interlocal agreements, because we're looking at that in a separate piece for all interlocal agreements. But Robert Rules could give some order to defining some of that stuff more clearly without opening up the whole interlocal piece.
I think it's fair to say that rarely do we have 9 members here.
Yeah.
And I think rarely would have 5. So,
Yeah.
it's at 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
So how do you break that up? It's I guess I don't know.
Well,
I'm asking a question.
It's back to the majority of the quorum, I guess, and
Yeah.
it still is, say if you were one of those 2 people out of the 5 that didn't want to do it, you could postpone to a meeting when more people were there. That would be a reason, I guess, to do that motion to postpone. Good question. Let's answer that. I guess follow the bylaws as they are. If, I'm not sure what section of Robert Rules defines quorum any differently for the majority. But, it could be our own self-rule, I guess. What would be the desire, I guess, if we were to say, okay, that's kind of vague, if it's the majority, then the quorum, and the majority of the quorum. We could define it as the majority, or if it's a quorum unanimous.
But that would mean anybody, I'm trying to think that through, sorry. So if it was the majority of the, so you have a quorum, so if you decide that your quorum is 5, and then you're requiring a unanimous of that,
Those 5.
of those 5.
it essentially ensures that any vote taken with only a quorum present would also have passed if the entirety
Right,
of the
that's
board
true.
was there.
Right.
That's what
Yeah.
it's there for.
Yeah.
Is to say that you can still conduct your business, but the standard for
That makes sense. That makes sense to kind of maybe clarify that as defining.
But didn't you also say, though, that if quorum, that if one of the people that are opposed to a vote, that they could actually choose to postpone it to the next meeting?
Well, they can make a
That was
motion.
Well, they can make a
That
motion,
would still
but
need
what are the chances that motion's gonna
And
pass?
the chance that you're not agreeing with what's being voted on, you're just gonna postpone it until this.
Well, that still requires the majority vote.
Right, it still
But that
requires,
still
so the
requires
chances
a
of that
still requires-
postponement amendment,
Otherwise, nothing would
motion
ever
going
pass if one
through
person.
would be, if you're the only
So,
one
so
that,
that has to be like.
right.
Second, so you-
So that person would still have to make a motion to postpone it, everybody would have to agree to do that.
So one of the key parts of Robert's rules, you did a good job describing that it protects the minority against the majority, but it also seeks to protect the majority against the minority as well, such that one person can't stalwart a meeting. There are mechanisms to get around that. It's basically set up to make sure that the meeting progresses as fairly as possible.
Right, the efficiency of a meeting as opposed to a workshop discussion.
Yeah.
I personally think we should adopt it, and I don't know if you need to adopt it in entirety or if it's in brief version. I've never heard it been adopted by sections, but,
Yeah.
Adopt what?
so like the Robert's rules by, adopting certain sections,
Right,
or just
right.
Robert's rules in general, unless one of our rules supersedes it. We could do it that way.
Yeah.
So
So,
Robert's rules would not specify this. This is,
Yeah. Or
this is
as-
in our bylaws.
Yes.
Right.
When is some, this is a general question, when is somebody or a group that maybe you've been a part of that you had Robert's rules, but you suspended them? That would be a thing. Why would you not want Robert's rules in a meeting? Because I've heard that's happened, but I haven't seen it. So I'm just saying, that's an option. If you decided you wanted it, for whatever reason it wasn't working, or you wanted to suspend it, that's another, down the road. I don't know why or when you would do that, and that's maybe another question.
Don't you suspend the rules to bring an agenda item up? Let's say you have counsel with you,
Out of order, or?
you suspend the rules, you bring that one up so you can get to his business and then get the paid attorney
Yes,
back to his office.
right, yes. That way too, probably.
Bring debate forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
so what you're doing is, when you do that, when you suspend those rules, what you're doing is you're essentially suspending the rules of order, like quite literally, in which order you're doing things.
Yeah.
It's,
You suspend the rules, but you can pretty much do anything. Right?
well, generally, when you suspend the rules, you make a motion to suspend the rules for a specific purpose. I mean, the board could choose to say, we'll just suspend the rules, but that would be really foolish of us, because then, without a
Yeah, then
specific
who
purpose
knows
in
how
mind, it
it'll
becomes the Wild West, right? I know I've been talking a lot. Being on another board that had previously adopted Robert's rules in its entirety, and then, and I'll be quite honest, I was one of the drivers of changing that. I was in favor of changing it specifically because we were not following Robert's rules when it did not fit our purpose, but we had adopted it as our set of rules. Now, the way Robert's rules is set up is such that if we could adopt Robert's rules and then do anything we want, and as long as none of us have an objection, Robert's rules is not like a legal document. Whatever we decide is decided, right? And we were finding that, yeah, for the most part, we were disregarding large sections of it because it didn't meet our needs or fit our purpose.
Was that done by majority vote?
What?
Within a meeting, when you decide to not follow Robert's rules?
Yeah, actually,
You had to
yeah.
do a majority vote in order to say, we're gonna do it this way? in
Yes,
this
because,
situation?
well, the difference being, we had a policy, a set of bylaws. So we had to, we had to amend our bylaws to say that we are not adopting Robert's rules of law. So that's why it was a majority kind of deal. I would assume that it would require majority, I would assume, I mean, it's gonna require a vote for us to adopt anything, I would
Yeah.
assume. But,
It's gonna be a majority vote.
Yeah.
I think so.
And I can tell you that when you get, like, if you get a chance to read Robert's rules, there are all kinds of rules that will not pertain to this body at all, but that someone could invoke because they are there, and because we have adopted them, and then we are kind of stuck in this weird draconian procedure. not that this board should do this, but I will say what we found after workshopping and talking about it, what was most helpful for us was for us to define our own policy on what the meeting order was, how it was run, what our expectations were of specific parts of meetings, and then we adopted a specific set of motions, and that we would follow Robert's rules in making those motions. We looked through and we said, okay, what are the motions that are required to run a meeting and that we use most often? And how does Robert's rules define those, and how are they made, and which kind of motion supersedes what? And not that we would necessarily do it, but after the discussion was done, it kind of was obvious to us that it was good to have that set of rules, but that the larger set of rules was not. Really
But you,
appropriate.
if I'm hearing you right, you didn't adopt Robert's rules, you used them as a guideline?
We adopted specific sections of Robert's rules into our policy manual. So we adopted those sections of Robert's rules that we thought were helpful for us to run our meetings.
A second.
The other sections that were not helpful,
Yeah, like with the motion.
Yeah, like the
And if you want to do that here, I think that would be probably next year with like the new commissioners and whatnot to decide how they want to run that, especially since then they can vote and decide on it. Because I do think that that is the best way to go about doing that, instead of just carte blanche, taking it all in, because then,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, there are those weird things that have nothing to do with anything that this board would ever take part of. So I do think that is the best way to go about it, take certain parts to how it pertains and then can change as needed, because it's not legally binding, it's how you run a meeting, so.
Yeah, the second handout is mostly about motions.
yeah.
So that, even some of those are not necessary, but I think that kind of is a good spot to look at and recommend is at least starting with the motion section. Until we get the book, I don't even know what some of these other sections are, but I can see what you're saying. If you've got all those rules, you can say, oh, I can do this rule on page 27.
Well, Robert's rules, so we always think of Robert's rules and we think of specifically motions, but within Robert's rules are rules for like order of business and specifically how public comment should be run and things like that. And again, I think I explained earlier, like, we don't do public comment the same way as, for instance, the city council does in Auburn,
Yeah,
because it does not meet our needs.
right. Planning. So I know that, do we even have a policy, personnel policy? Our own policies, meeting policies? I don't
It was a
know.
policy that wasn't adopted, it was more conduct, not
Oh, the
necessarily
ethics one or the-
personnel. Standard conduct for
It's not for
watershed
personnel.
commissioners.
Yeah, it wasn't really anything to do with meetings and rules. Ethics is a good one, I can't remember seeing that one though.
I think a good place for us to look would be to start with the AWD bylaws and procedures.
Not to be confused with the protection of Lake Auburn bylaws.
Right, like the bylaws they use to govern their meetings. But
I've got
Even
that right.
if, because even if we don't sort of like the way it's written, we should probably look there. I think, I don't know, I'm sort of a stickler for consistency. Whatever we do should at least look consistent.
Oh, I see what you're saying, like it says exactly how public comment is handled.
Right, so things like, so I think it would be in our best interest, since we're, we're not sister boards or anything like that, but we are tied to them and they are tied to us very specifically, that it would be in everybody's best interest if ours kind of really doesn't have to match theirs, per se. It needs to be able to fit with our needs, but it's consistent at least.
And then the next document would be the Lewiston City Council procedures, because obviously
Yep.
this board is made up of City of Lewiston and the Auburn Water District.
Yeah, those two would be,
Take the best from both of those
Yeah,
and
that sounds good. Because then you're really setting your own rules.
Yeah.
And not needing to adopt this at all, because you're really setting your own rules that model some of that and stay
right,
consistent with
and
the other
things that are
organizations.
missing from there that we feel
Yeah, I
we
don't
need from
think
Robert's
I'll do-
rules, we can pull in and.
Yeah. I do go to how this is written.
Because, you know, as Caleb said, there's no law that says we have to do something, and we're just required to create a set of rules for ourselves, so they can be whatever they need to be for us to be able to function.
Does this deal with how to put something on an agenda, like that kind of piece?
It's been a while since I looked through
Yeah, it has agenda
AWD.
setting, it says, just so you guys interested.
Yeah.
It's pretty orderly is what I like.
Yeah,
The president of the board of trustees shall set the agenda and transmit the same to each trustee with a call for every meeting. The president shall use his or her discretion in placing and scheduling items on the agenda, provided the president may not unreasonably delay in placing items requested by other trustees. So, see. All trustees may suggest items for future agendas during regular meetings or at other times. So that's kind of that new business. And I know, you know, we haven't really formally said, okay, this new business comment should be considered for next meeting. Is it, you know? Like, we've got a couple kind of pending now to say, okay, let's make sure those get in February's. But I think it needs to be stated, and then that's stated in the minutes, that at the next meeting, this would be a topic for consideration, and then you have that to fall back on too, you know, I was just saying that.
So how do we determine, one of the questions I've had, like how we prioritize what we cover each meeting? Because I know we usually have an update on water quality, which I think is very vitally important to what we do here. I mean, there's always a treasurer's report, which I think obviously is a very important piece. I mean, to me, knowing that recreation's a big part of, you know, planning new trails, I think to me, I'd like to see that particular piece on every meeting, 'cause I think that's a lot of the essence of what we do, is trying to move forward, and those all take time, so if it takes you 3 meetings to even get something on there about a trail that we're trying to develop, or whatever, I mean, that just delays moving forward with planning next steps and stuff like that, so I mean, so how do you develop, but also knowing that you have a certain amount of time, and you don't have to, every time you meet, you have a 4-hour meeting, because, I mean, that's not
I know.
great either, so I mean, so
Not
how do
all
you
the time.
determine those types of things?
I'm willing to bet the president of the trustees doesn't put that together.
No, I know.
And we have.
I know, staff recommends, and then you can adjust it.
So Steve Milks is our president, he's the mayor's representative as well, and he gets with Sid about a week and a half prior, and they look at what was, you know, old business, prior minutes, and they make sure that the agenda is good. And then they're very considerate to, if something was left out, to either suspend the rules or get it in somehow under another item. This seems to work fine.
yeah, I can tell you that process worked well on the planning board too, when I was the chair, that I would meet about a week and a half prior to the meeting, and we would go through the agenda. It was good, it was really good, because then the chair and staff that's put this together, staff being the one that are gonna present a lot of information, know where the other's at, right, which is important. But it also allowed staff to get some heads up on possible questions, so they weren't sort of just caught in the middle of a meeting, right? So it was really good for staff too.
That's a process that can easily happen for the February meeting that we got coming up. You know, that first next one.
Well, I think that's very similar to what we've been doing. You know, Sid has been really assembling it, getting it out and disseminating, you see, but he checks with Eric and I, and I'm sure he checks with Mike, and we follow ideas that have come up either from emails or whatever, and try to be responsive to that. So,
But the chair hasn't been in the formal
the
improvement.
chair has not been in that formal process. Nope.
I think it's a good process to move forward with that, to include the chair.
And as commissioners, I mean, can we like email the chairman to suggest an agenda type of
I know,
topic?
and that's like, who do you,
So how does that work?
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think you go to the chair, yeah.
There's nothing prohibiting it either way right now, so.
well, and I think it should be
think it-
clear though, because it comes in a number of different ways, and we want it to be consistent, I
Right.
guess, and.
It does.
Or are we saying it has to be brought up with a meeting to be put on, and like, you can't contact Steve in the middle of, between 2 meetings and say, I want this on the agenda, right? I mean, is that kind of what we're,
Right.
Right, but then there are some times where you might want that, so we
Right.
can be responsive.
right,
I know AWD works that way. The planning board is quite different, because our agendas are really set by business that we have to accomplish, right? And there are other things that we can put on, but because it's never been an issue, I guess. Some of the models that I've seen that I really like require a specific number, so like the chair can put something on, or members can put something on, but it requires a specific number of members following a specific procedure, like, communicating with the chair and with staff a specific amount of time ahead of the meeting, which would be on the agenda. I kind of like that model, just because it allows members to, right, like, I think Steve's a stand-up guy.
Yeah,
I don't
just a
think he
little
would ever,
bit.
I don't think he would ever brick wall anyone out, but you never know. We might get Dan up there and then.
That's all right, you can pick on me.
Just a little.
No, the idea is, you know what I mean, it's possible if we have a thing where the chair has sole responsibility over that with staff, they might just say, well, let's never make it count.
I didn't see the email.
Right, yeah, exactly, so.
But right now, today, everything goes to you and Sid.
We pretty much.
Yeah,
did
an
all
agenda
that.
item, we'll track one of you two.
Yep.
Well, I think including Steve in that is an important new step going forward,
No, absolutely.
you know, and then, like, I think of recreation and just, I think we need a workshop on that to better understand all the pieces. For me, I've seen a little piece of like, where we approved, you know, some of the gate piece for grooming,
Yep, yep.
but then when it came to like a new piece, I had no idea what they're doing. I really need to learn the snowmobile area around here, for number one, in my city as well. But understanding like that lot was restricted and no trespassing, why was that? Is that forever? Is it just for so many years? Or, like, I don't understand some of that as a noob. So I think that recreation is an important topic around the lake. But that's a workshop that I, you know, getting into the next thing with the workshops, is that it's hard to just say, yeah, why aren't we doing that? And I don't really know the whole piece. You know, how does that, and so then we have a plan moving forward for recreation and knowing where we will have new opportunities come up, and then it would be kind of, you know, common, or that you would know about it, sort of a master plan for recreation, I guess. Because we do that somewhat, but I don't think I've seen it.
And how involved do we need to be in that?
Well, it's still, if it's covering our land, you know what I
That's
mean?
right.
Because it is a piece, like, we got properties that we conserve and that we own, that are in trusts, and I love the color coding, but certainly the ones that we own. And I, you know, certainly had a lot of good exposure to what a forestry plan is and how that's important, and, you know, we adopted pretty much the similar one in the city, and we've been doing that for years too. But when it comes to the snowmobile trails, and yeah, we don't want them going across the lake, but can they, what, should we have them going through our properties, and how do we clear a trail, and is there money involved with getting that cleared, or can it be done by hand, or, you know, that's what I wasn't clear about. So like the one that came across recently, I didn't even know we had properties that had no trespassing on it. I'm like, which properties are those, and why is it? You know, and is it forever?
And then there's a lot of hiking and jogging
Yeah,
trails that cross our land.
yeah.
We tend to use the word multi-use trails now,
Yes, yes,
because
right,
Yeah,
yeah,
especially the
Yeah,
last
yeah.
3 years,
Yeah.
the snowmobile traffic has been like 2%
yeah.
of what's going on those trails.
And then the last,
Fat biking, snowshoeing, skiing is all still predominant.
the last meeting, they mentioned horses. never
I
saw
know, that was,
horses.
that was, no,
And
that
all of a
was
sudden,
good,
you know,
good comments.
there could be recreational horses up there, and how do you look at that?
I'll bring this up at the next meeting too, but I did talk to the owner of Underwood Farm, and she didn't even know where Whitman Spring Road was, or
Now she
That's
does.
good
or
news.
where the other trails were, so she said they're not planning on being on them, and if anywhere that they go, they clean up after their animals.
Good to know.
Huh.
So I think one, and to your
No?
point
No,
about the
that's
meeting,
interesting, because in front of the planning board, she specifically talked about
Yeah.
utilizing the trails.
Really?
No, I haven't. She emailed me and
And
said,
she contacted
Maybe
Perkins
she
Ridge
didn't know the
to
name
use the
of it.
trails.
Yeah. What?
maybe she didn't know the name of
Maybe
it.
she didn't know the names of the trails, but it was just kind of interesting, because I had to, that project had to come before us, and that was one of the things she discussed.
yeah, I said trails off of West Auburn Road, connecting down to Whitman Spring Road.
She may not have known what they were planning, you know.
Yeah. Are
Back
horses
to-
allowed on the Whitman Spring Road?
We didn't decide.
There used to be, we just.
There's
had-
nothing expressly
Okay, more to the point,
prohibiting
would
it.
it be the same rule with regard to waste as?
To pick up after, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I was walking the other day, and there was a couple riding horses, but the horses weren't carrying bags on back.
And it's got a
Yeah.
bigger bag, yeah.
Yeah,
That's a heck of a thing to carry out.
yeah.
They do it for parades, it's all I know.
So I was just gonna comment on your comment with the regular agendas, and so as we talk about like a consent agenda and a regular agenda, the stuff that has been typically been on with water quality reports and treasury report, I mean, I think what we need to determine as a commission is what do we want our focuses of our meetings to be? So if we wanna spend a lot of time on that, or do we want that to be a consent agenda item and you're expected to like look at it beforehand, and if you have questions versus a long presentation on those items, so that you have more time to spend on other topics. I just throwing it out there is that something that we wanna consider?
So there could be more of a report that's included in the agenda packet for
Right.
commissioners to read beforehand, and then if you
Yeah.
have questions, bring those up.
So I know like with my board, we provide status reports of all the work that we do in their packet, and I do like a quick, and then it's, okay, you read it in your packet, does anybody have any questions? I mean, it's very detailed in that report, very specific for that time frame. And then, you know, we don't go through it in length, just as an option for, I mean, I guess it's, what do we want our focus to be on at the.
But that's not a bad idea. My only concern would be, I would want at least once a year
A
for
full,
staff to be able to present in depth, so that way any new members understand what it is
Oh,
they're
yeah.
actually looking at, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
yes, that's true.
Because you can give someone all kinds of information, but if they don't understand what they're looking at, it's not particularly useful to them.
And we may pick sections, we may say, okay, Erica, every meeting, we want you to focus on these things, and then everything else we can
It's
read in
just
the
a consent
report,
agenda,
or something like that. And then, since I've been on, which has been a few years now, we've had presentations, which were really helpful for me, coming on and not understanding a lot of, you know, the you know, how, when I'm looking at where you're saying these reports, what everything means, right? So I think having that as maybe, like you said, an annual presentation that kind of is a reorientation. So I think it's a reorientation for people who are here
Yeah.
and an orientation for people who are new.
Almost like a, dare I say, training, you know?
Yeah.
Like how to read the information
Yeah, it's
and
important,
understand
I
what
mean-
staff is presenting.
But I guess go back to recreation thing, there may be action steps that we could need to continue to move forward with, that we would have to kind of review in our meetings to vote on, because those can really stall things. You know what I'm saying? Let's say the next step in our trail is somebody has to go in there and clear a certain part or something. If that's something that's to be voted on, and we wait, 3 meetings to do it, then this kind of really stalls things from you moving forward with things where there may be action steps with certain things that we talk on our agenda about. There may be action steps. If you want to continue to kind of approve or vote on those steps to continue to move forward with some of these projects, which are could be long-term projects that we just delay even further because we just don't bring it up often enough to vote on action steps to make the next piece happen that needs to happen to move forward, for example. So, I know I keep going to recreation, but it's certainly one of my areas of
Yeah.
interest, certainly.
Yeah.
The only one, but certainly in that, so again, that's why I think that that's part of what we determine is on an agenda, is stuff that we really have to continue to look at regularly to make decisions about next action steps, so that we just don't stall things, just don't sit there for months without anything happening with them.
So you're saying because like the agenda would be so long, we wouldn't get to it, or?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we don't have time to put it on this month, so we're gonna wait, we meet in 2 months to bring it up, and at that point, I mean, nothing's happening, and we have to wait to vote on something within this
Yeah.
structure.
So that might be a good reason to put a mechanism where members can put something on an agenda. So we might end up with a meeting that's got an agenda that is clearly too long. Like we know we're not gonna get through this. But once we become versed in Robert's rules, and this has happened to us before, and I'm sure this has happened on the city council and over your AdCog, where you're not getting to all this, and now people start making motions to suspend the rules and take up a specific agenda item now instead of waiting, because as the board, you're prioritizing now, okay, well, this was agenda item 5, but this definitely needs to get done tonight, so we're doing this, and so it allows us to kind of,
No, we definitely, those are the ones that they should be in the priority order to begin with. And I think that's the most important part of our meetings, is having some of those good discussions about the important topics that we want to move along.
Yeah.
One of the key things that this committee doesn't remember or realize, because we haven't been here that long, is the clerks were given certain powers maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 or 8, to do certain things. Like, for instance, they could handle multi-use recreational discussions and permits because they understand the policy that you folks have set down. That wouldn't even come up. It would just be water quality concerns here. You know, so giving the clerks the power to work with the user groups would fix the recreational limitations and things get installed.
Can we actually, that was a question that I had a while back, and I went through the minutes, and I could not find it. And I talked to Tiz Crowley, and she couldn't quite remember, and I kind of let it go, because things got busy when I was first put on. What specific powers were given to the clerks that had previously required board action?
I have no idea.
No, I'm saying like, I would like that.
What is, that's the question?
Right.
Oh, you mean?
Yeah, because that would be important for us to know as we come up with these policies and things, to say like, okay, what can be delegated to them? And not just what can, but what specifically should be, you know? Like, what should we not be necessarily spending our time on so that we can spend it on?
Right, and it just delays action a lot of times, if it's, you know, one thing that, like Dan said, if they have the policy, and we've established that policy, they should follow it and, you know, do the will of the board, you know, of the
Right, yeah.
commission to make that decision versus, well, we gotta wait and it's gonna go back and now it's gonna hold that up and.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree, it would be, we should know what those things are. I mean, I don't know if we do it almost ad hoc, like at a meeting, just say, okay, well, you know how we feel, Sid and Kevin, so go ahead, or is there something that's more formal?
Well, I think there's some things, you know, water withdrawal, we have that policy that goes on, we don't report out to that. You see it as a line item on revenues or expenditures and then put it in the financial report. There's actual land use with hunting and other non-trail type use, that's volunteerism, that's done, so. And there's been a lot of partnering prior to Erica, but since she's been here as well, with those groups to have discussions, so that the work is being done outside of this group, definitely to prepare to have either a formal presentation or something that's more than just a conceptual from an outside group that comes in. So we definitely interact in your behalf to be able to get some of that work prepped and done so that you're not just hearing this haphazard thing, but at the same time, we've had groups that have come to you that didn't come to Sid or I or any of the other staff and had a request for proposal directors. So it's been all over. Honestly, I don't know of power, there's nothing that we can do on your behalf to enter any contracts or change laws or rules or anything like that. So we're just being that intermediary with groups to facilitate discussion. The policies that are approved, we do administer, and if there's an outlier, then we bring it to you and there's a change or something. I think one thing that Al just brought up that I wanted to point out, we've been here an hour, so thank you. It is an extra workshop time. One thing is how late, you know, you're on other groups, so how late do you want to stay? Typically we put a start time, we never put an end time, and I think having an agenda with a timeline in it might really help, because, you know, we don't want to impose a 3 or 4 hour, that's not fun for anybody. So how late do you want to stay today? And we have a couple other items to discuss. I don't want to rush this point. If we want to continue to take the whole time to talk about this, it's great. But I just throw that out there.
To that end, I would suggest that we create a formal mechanism that does not allow us to extend the meeting without a vote. I'll give you an example. We cannot take up a new agenda item after 9 o'clock without a motion for each individual additional agenda item to do so, and that motion passes. So that's like a rule that we adopted forever and a day ago, so that way we wouldn't be there until 11 o'clock because all these items were there.
The course started at 6 p.m. We're all wondering, oh,
Yeah,
it's
so
a
I
long
asked you when
day.
we started that meeting, if you're staying at 9. Hope it's not 3:30.
That works. The mechanism's there to extend it, you just have to have a
Right, there's,
Consent.
there is an end date, there's an end time, but there's a mechanism to extend it, but it requires the majority to want to do it.
I would,
I like that.
I say, you know, if you say it's 5:30, it's 5:30. If it's approaching that time and somebody wants to have it further, then we all have to vote to agree to take it up.
Yeah, it kind of like, kind of honors everybody's time, right? So that
Right.
way, you know, you're not.
And to that point, Camille was, felt bad she couldn't make it. She, you know, she had commitments. And we've had this discussion before. And there isn't somebody in this room, anybody in this room, that wouldn't have that same issue one time or another. So who do you change for? You know, so you have to feel bad, but
Yeah, I
That's
think
the way-
it's the week or the day. I don't know what her.
The day of the
She
week,
just
yeah,
asked
it
like a
could be a
workshop.
Thursday,
Yeah.
Monday,
Not
Thursday,
a
or
week.
Friday,
Yeah,
just for this
for the
school.
workshop.
Yeah, for the workshop.
These, just everybody's, these days have been picked because of other water, you know, Auburn Water, Auburn Sewer, the city council, all of you are on other boards, so
Yeah.
this is the one that generally worked for most. Not that it couldn't change, you couldn't do a special meeting.
Well, we don't, at this point, have any other workshops planned yet, but just to recap a little bit about the meeting part and, you know, questions, is that I've had, you know, work with staff to review the Auburn Water District and the city rules, that we write up our own set of rules that incorporate some pieces of the Roberts rules, but we're really just adopting our own rules in the end, and kind of put together a draft for the February meeting. And then new items for the agendas going forward go to Sid, Kevin, and Steve, so that we include them in that piece and make sure that that agenda that's going out the week ahead has been reviewed by you and new ideas. One thing about the new ideas piece too is that if somebody wants a new idea, that they do their little 5-minute presentation too, that they, you know, kind of commit to doing some of that work in the background if it's something they're presenting. Clarifying the clerk's powers, maybe expand, maybe not, but just be clear about what those are to be able to be more, not holding things back that could have that minor approval. Extend a meeting only with a vote, the majority vote to extend a meeting. Have a beginning and end time, you know, like originally we thought an hour and a half for a workshop was plenty. 2 hours for a regular meeting was probably plenty. But then we have the beginning and end time thing. And then possibly add more detail to the package being sent prior to the meeting so that we can spend more time on the agenda items. And move some things, some parts of maybe the watershed report or something with an annual kind of bigger review. We're looking at this 5 meetings that we have, you know, this February one would be a good orientation one, we've got election of offices, a certain one, we got budget, a certain one. So each one of those could actually, in the February meeting, plan out what the year is.
Yeah, and I think to that point on the agenda is the order of the agenda.
Yeah.
Because if we, you know, I've seen it in the past
Yeah.
with this commission, it's like everything we really have to talk about is right at the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
So then people don't want to have, you know, at that point, you're not, so if we need to have an executive session or something, I mean, I understand for public,
Mhm.
maybe we try to somehow balance that, so we're taking up what we really need to discuss earlier rather than
Yeah,
later.
fair.
Well, you know, one thing that occurs to me too, as you're talking about the agenda, is, I would really love it if our agenda was formatted in such a way that it was incredibly clear as to which items are going to require action by the board,
Mhm.
and which are
Yeah,
simply communications or informational items.
Update.
and we do that on our, so our,
Yeah, we split it out into communications and then.
yeah, so ours will just say discussion, like action, discussion, or action is, you know, approval or whatever it is. So we specify what the action of each agenda item is. If it's discussion, it's just listed as
Yeah,
discussion.
action items.
Or report would be another one, like just a report.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, that's what we
That
do,
would be
it's
helpful.
listed as a report or a workshop, so we actually run workshops within our meetings, because for us, each hearing is its own item. It's quite literally its own meeting, we run it all within one meeting, but there's gotta be a way that we could do it here too.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful.
I think we can go with the hybrid, a little bit more hybrid, or kind of headed with a new one. Kind of keeping the executive sessions together, keeping consent together.
Yeah, and then just under
Action
each,
and
just do
discussion.
action, and then say what we are
Yeah.
expecting
Yeah,
for an
action with discussion.
And what's the proper way of moving something up the agenda? Because if I come in and say, I gotta be out of here in 5 minutes, you know, I'm number 7, can you move me up to number 2?
Well, it does say it on here that that is suspending the rules, as Dan said. It's
It
right on.
depends on what you adopt.
If
It
you have-
depends
Yeah.
on how, if we don't adopt the agenda and the agenda is developed by the chair and staff, the chair can move anything at any time, because we haven't actually, we haven't adopted that as our budget, we've accepted the chair's budget as
Yeah.
he's presented it. Which is why you'll see agendas adopted at the beginning of meetings, because
Okay.
once it's adopted at the beginning of meetings,
Then
then
you
you are suspending the rules.
Uh-huh.
I will say how, again, how the council does it, at least the mayor, or so in this case, the chair, would say, like, without objection, we can move agenda item 7 up to, you know, 1.
We've
to do
always
this now.
asked that,
Yeah.
but sometimes you just,
And then if there's objection, then it doesn't happen, and then you can vote to suspend the rules to do it, but if there's no objection, then everyone's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. So I think that works pretty well, because if it is just to accommodate a visitor, so if we have someone who's
Yeah.
come in from out of state for whatever reason, and they have to leave, or if it's the chair, or something like that, I think that works pretty well.
I was just like, it's some good breakup notes, you guys. I already missed the one that I was looking for. To kind of get back to that whole, the meetings that we have that are regular, and there's only 3 months where you could have a workshop. You know, so, looking at it, you know, we've had this one here for December, and we've got a regular meeting in February.
Well, it's possible for us to workshop and have a meeting
Yes.
on the same day.
So you also have January and then July to August.
Yeah, I skipped July on purpose, but July and August on purpose, but I don't know why I skipped January. Good field trip to use.
I have another
And
topic for
December.
you.
Yeah,
I'd like to review the land we own.
the land.
The land we own,
The land we own.
yeah. See, it comes up every so often that we're gonna buy a piece of land,
Yeah.
and we do or we don't. And I'm just curious what we own, why we own it, and can it go back on the tax roll? Probably the answer's gonna be no when it's done, but I guess I need to hear.
Oh,
We have a map of that, don't we, Kevin?
Yep, we got it in
Get
GIS.
map for it.
We could also, depending on the level of detail you wanted,
what were you talking about?
because of the screen, you could look at it in Google.
Well, it was in the
got maps
policy,
in there.
right? I mean, don't we have the land policy and it had.
Yeah, we just formalized that, I think, last year,
Or
or the year
2
before.
years ago, maybe, because that's what I remember going through all of that. We did the policy with looking at the land first
And,
policy.
you know, I know some of it's got
And then we had the maps.
encumbrances on it and stuff, and there's nothing you can do.
Right, yep,
I
to
just-
review that.
You
Yep.
know, I'm curious, we own a lot of road frontage, we want lake frontage, can we sell the road frontage?
Would you
And like I
like
said, the
that,
answer's probably gonna be no before we're done, but
are we looking at that as a workshop or a meeting item?
I look at it as a workshop.
Workshop topics, but maybe included in a regular meeting if we had time and the other agenda items weren't filling it up, that you could put a workshop item in there.
Are we
I think
kind
that
of
there's a
moving,
lot of parcels
kind of
out
moving
there,
to
but
agenda
I think
item
we go
number
through all
3
the
for this
parcels.
workshop at this point?
I guess so.
Let's see, is that what we're,
We're gonna.
I think, I heard, Mary Ann give us a really good rundown about what we said with regard to
Meetings.
moving forward with policies and things, but all, me included, have brought up questions that we have that we might want to talk about again. Are we really jumping the gun here and getting to item number 3 on tonight's agenda?
Well, it could be, but
Well, I was just thinking that it's still gonna need to come back for somebody, you know, for more of discussion, like I can see
Yeah.
whatever we come up with to kind of say, all right, here's a general,
Yeah.
like it might look like this, or be a few pages of what's the rules around meetings, and doesn't necessarily get involved in our bylaws, but this is our policy, it'd be a policy.
Well, I
As a
guess I
draft,
was
which
also
had to
kind
be
of
a
thinking,
discussion item on the agenda.
I was thinking kind of to Kevin's point that he was trying to politely make to us that we, we're starting to,
Well, I think item 2 we've talked about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, yeah, we're on to number 3.
and we got 15 minutes. And I didn't make these up because I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the Lake Robin study. Certainly Camille could help with some of that in her review, I know the others can as well, but I know that she had interest in that. And then, you know, looking at the snowmobile trails. I know-
Multi-use.
Multi-use, I'm gonna put multi-use forever now. Anywhere from snowmobiles to
That fat
trails
biker
to
doesn't wanna head up.
bikers to bikes to dogs to, yeah. And then, you know, the restricted parcels comes out of what land do we own and what category is it in? And then you know, we have a watershed study that needs to be updated, so, that could be and actually, you know, when you look at the February meeting with maybe at least one new member, that could be that reorientation piece. And then your meetings, your reports become more systematic in the consent agenda, right? Because you started at a spot of an overview. You know, and that's a good place for that overview of the watershed, to keep that in more of a broad picture for new people. And then move more into the consent agenda, like updating what are the water levels, what's the bacteria levels, blah, 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 blah. It's just put in a report, and then, you know, questions or things that are odd, you know, a little bit less time on that. The other one I had for a topic on workshops was other communities. What are they doing for their policies on watershed? Because we want to start developing better relationships with, working with Turner, or working with the other smaller communities. You represent 3 different communities, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do they have in place now? Is there a planner or somebody that could come in to present with us, or, I don't know, even like, for instance, in Turner Allen, who's overseeing the,
Good question, yeah.
you know what I mean? And just like, could they come in and talk to us
Have a lot to
about
learn
what's in
about
They
place
don't,
now
they
to
don't
protect?
employ planners, they have,
You don't?
Turner has a contract planner, and they don't have planners, they use our planner,
That's-
if they need something.
It would be good to hear what mechanisms they have or don't have
We don't have.
in order to protect the watershed.
Yeah, and-
Well, I will tell you, at the last selectmen's meeting, I mentioned it, at this meeting, we touched upon the subject of protection of the watershed, and I didn't get a warm reception.
Yeah.
So we need to find a way around that.
Well,
That carrot on the stick.
right, because we heard from Jim this year that it's possible to get very adversarial if AWD so chooses, and they could impose ordinances
Yes.
within the watershed. You'd hate for it to get to that point.
The right to protect its tributaries and all influxes into the Lake Auburn.
But at the point where that starts happening, boy,
Maybe we
things
present
must
to
have
them.
really fallen apart. You hope when you get there.
Are you thinking like they wouldn't even want us to present to them?
So future agenda item would be to get some language from this board to the Auburn Water District to give them guidance as to how they can proceed in protecting its upper tributaries.
Maybe some broad categories.
I know Camille was interested in that as well. She had some other items she emailed.
Yep. Is it possible to expand instead of the new multi-use trails? Is it, that is part of it, but is it possible to discuss recreational use in general?
Yes, yeah, that kind of came out of that.
Yeah, that's, I was thinking about what
Yeah.
Adam was talking about earlier, and it's really not just limited to that, but I want to make sure that.
Yeah, because I was asking questions usually about what boats are allowed and where were they, and is the buoys out there in the lake that tell you which section of the lake is it isn't, because I haven't been on the lake.
And in the spirit of working with our partners, the city of Auburn would be very interested in getting recreational easements on LAWPC properties, at least for existing trails. So right now, the commission probably doesn't know that the land is privately owned. It's basically utility law for the protection of the water source, but it's not a perpetual easement by any means, that this land is always going to be available to citizens of Auburn to recreate or the community. So that would be something part of that recreational piece, is for this board to consider an easement to the city of Auburn.
Recreational easement.
So, I was just gonna say, so Camille had said, with regards to future workshop items, I spoke at our last meeting about the need to strategically plan to address ongoing watershed problems that were listed in past documents, are currently observable in most recent water quality data, and are projected in the future Lake Auburn study. So that was her comment.
To the Lake Auburn study, item 1 up there.
Well, she also asked for consideration for the days, right? So she has conflict on Wednesdays until the end of April.
Yeah.
So if it's workshops before April, she's wondering if, Monday, Thursday, or Friday might work.
Going back to the, looking at other solutions from other past reports, I know we just did a culvert repair, we just approved something else too, but are there other lingering recommendations on reports that should be on that ongoing list of, there are other recommendations on some of the other reports that we just had done,
Have commissioners asked about it? Sorry, what was she?
Yeah, no, the reports that we had other people do, and they had recommendations, like what is she referring to? To continue to implement recommendations or talk about
Yes,
recommendations?
right, yes.
Right, so what would those?
There's a list of
There's a
them.
list, there is a list,
Yeah.
okay.
So of all the different studies, when
Yeah.
Erica first came in,
Yeah.
we'd been trying to work on that because we were looking for the smoking gun that caused
Mhm.
the algae in the fish kill.
Gotcha.
And of that, there were multiple studies, CEI, CDM,
Mhm.
some other ones. So it depends on which part of the watershed. Some were some watersheds, some were, I think the CEI report was holistic. So there are things like on Spring Road that have been, some of the culverts, but we've been monitoring those. They're not huge erosion issues, they're not a smoking gun, but it's something that we're slowly checking off the list. But they're not, we got in there initially and repaired that big erosion that went up into West Auburn Road. And that was a multi-year,
Mhm.
multi-agency approach. So we're not seeing any of those, but I think maybe putting out again that work that Erica did to audit all of the different reports,
Mhm, yeah.
all the
I've
action
not seen
items.
that, yeah.
and then what she's done is come out with future action items and then is putting up there for the next watershed study to update it, because in a year or two, it'll be 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
Maybe as part of the February's, update that list and kind of present that list as part of the watershed report. So that we're all on the same page with that and we see it once a year even, we know where it's moving ahead or what takes years or what might be low hanging fruit. Because we do, I think we put very little money into the account for buying land and we really don't want to buy land. We want to have conserved land or, have the right practices done on the land, but we're not in the business to own land really. That gets used for some of those capital projects, which we got, 60,000 or something approved in the budget to do a capital project next year.
well, I think
It's
maybe
peanuts
it's part
anyway.
of
It's peanuts.
I think maybe it's part of the study summary, Erica, we could probably do something related to an overall threat analysis, because that's what we're using to prioritize property. As staff and as two separate utilities, trying to manage that, but then come to this board and
Mhm.
be part of this process, there are a bunch of different threats, and how are we managing those? So we'll try to address that or also list that out.
Lots of good things happening, that's for sure.
Because right now, we haven't talked about, I don't think we've talked about it here, but, drinking water side, unregulated contaminants, we're monitoring in the lake, in the watershed. I think Eric, you brought it up a little bit, but it's very technical, dealing with EPA and the drinking water side, but they're looking for future contaminants. Like if you're in the watersheds down in Massachusetts, with the density and the population, those are legitimate concerns, and they're trying to assess what are the concerns up in Maine and what's our risk. So we're always trying to understand what's the risk. We'll try to better convey that.
Absolutely. I think we've got good topics. What would we see as the burning priority, and if we wanted to do something in January, do we want to consider that, I guess, because that's our next decision. Talk about next steps. I mean, if there's any other topics, we can always be submitted to the chair and to sit. I think we got a lot of good topics. And I know the Lake Auburn study, there was a deadline or something about recommendations going to the Auburn City Council or planning board or something? I mean,
So
does the planning board have some?
City council wouldn't be presenting it until next year. So I think the idea was if commissioners looked at it and had any comments, to gather those by our February meeting.
And do some sort of a presentation on that, or a discussion about it, or what are the sections in that 200-page report that relate to the watershed?
Yeah.
I don't want it to be just general discussion about the whole report.
No.
And some of it that's not any of our business, but what relates to the watershed, you know, like
Right.
those specific sections.
Yeah.
So it seems like we have to have that before we say, okay, then give me comments on these things. So otherwise, you're gonna get random comments back for the whole report. It should be more focused, I would think. You know, what is it, which pieces do we want?
A perfect example of that is in the study, it recommends that when doing forestry and logging in the Lake Alvin watershed, that you adopt even better management practices than the best management practices. For instance,
Like the percent that
this
clear.
committee next meeting could say, we're gonna have a moratorium on any exposed soils that this organization creates. And just a perfect example, City of Lewiston did a great job with cross-control culverts, but they could have laid down some crushed rock that was screened on the trail surface. They could have put some seed and some hay on the ruts that were created. Just a little thought process on exposed soils, because if you think of the one single man-made pollution that we can control, and that is exposed soils. That's our logging operation, that's our rip wrapping and what they're doing with culverts and making sure things are stabilized. But we can say that as a group, and that would be a go forward thinking, first meeting, boom, no exposed soils, or best management practices require the same as building a house or a commercial development in the watershed. If you're gonna log and you're gonna put your paths down this way, down this way, and down this way, you're gonna have silt fence here, you're gonna pull out, you're gonna replant, or you're gonna put down hay and seed, erosion control mulch, works great. These are all things that'll help, so when you get that 2-inch rain event, oh well, we just got a $30,000 check for logging, great. Oh, we can, do all kinds of work with that, but how about that erosion that just went into the lake because of us? So this is what I thought would be a
Time of year.
priority.
Well, time of year and things like that, because we're just looking at the site up behind the solid waste facility. So much percent of the forest is what's the healthy piece to remove, and it's different at every different site. Time of year makes a difference, and then the additional practices that happen with that. But I know, letting it all decompose, all that kind of stuff is gonna takes years, Can't say there will never be any exposed soil. It's too broad, I think.
So what Dan is speaking to, in my mind, and for me as a board member, what I would be most interested in hearing about from the study, from staff and a presentation, are the recommendations and actionable items that pertain to what we do and fall within authority that we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if it's like items about land use zoning, right? Like maybe include that as information, right? But what's presented in the meeting itself, verbally, and we're asking questions about, would be those things that we can actually act on. Because sure, it'd be great to hear about all the other things,
Yeah.
really, what are the pieces that we can work on? That's what I would be most interested in, because you're right.
There's a
so
really good summary in the study.
Yeah, right, it's.
I know, but just for everybody else, there's a really good summary that I think we could work off of that. So, okay, out of these recommendations, which apply to us,
Yeah.
and go forth with those.
Mhm.
You know,
They did
That
a
can
good
be
job
discussion.
giving you that.
Yep,
Yep.
I did.
because then we're not spinning our wheels on things that. Well, more specifically, you guys don't have to spin your wheels on things that.
I was just looking at the February one, I'm just looking at new people watershed overview. A little update on the February meeting too is that we'll have a recommendation for a treasurer. And then, we won't vote on, we'll have to vote on it in that February month, I think, right? So that we have one. I mean, our bylaws said we have a secretary and a chair, that's it. So we've kind of gone above and beyond what we need in our bylaws for that. And that's what will come into here. you know, like, not only what's the role, but this is what the vice chair does. Because I don't think we've ever elected, the secretary. In
Oh,
some
I think we do.
formality.
Yeah, we,
That was elected in the last minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did, we did.
Good.
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll have to elect that treasurer, and so there hasn't been any recommendations, but I'm pushing Heather Hunter to give her recommendations and talk to Sid about his, staff person being a backup, but we'd rather have someone else do it. So we'll look at the recommendation and see what people think, but what would you want on that? Would you want, obviously, the person to be here, or a little presentation before? I mean, it's hard to, we would just vote on them without the person here, but have a background, or? What do you guys wanna see on that, I guess, cause I don't even know really what to ask Heather for besides who are you thinking about? I don't know all their backgrounds, that's for sure.
Auburn was gonna check with their people,
He
see if
did,
they had
Sid
the
said she
interest.
doesn't really want to, but she would if she had to.
And, okay, I didn't hear that answer.
So that was
Yeah.
Sid, so,
Heather was gonna present a name if she could.
Yeah, we didn't
Just go
reach
with-
out to Auburn City Hall to see if they had someone that wanted to, you know, offer up to be the treasurer.
Well, I think we can start with whatever Heather's recommendation is and
Yeah,
go from there.
I know the finance director really well in Auburn, worked with her in a budget.
yeah.
I can ask, you know what I mean, just to say, hey, this is what we're thinking, and pass that around, and if it seems like the three entities, Western Auburn and Auburn Water District, has the same one person, then we'll bring that, and if it's more than one person, we'll have it as a discussion item. That sound
It didn't sound like the list was going to be long.
I can't imagine there are many volunteers, so.
Yeah, no,
$2,500.
that's a little, it is a little bit of money, which is better than some, I guess. Well, I think we got a good start, you guys, I don't think we have
Thank you
to
very much.
identify, you know, I think kind of looking towards not having a January workshop, is that what people were thinking? We just had this one, and then kind of plan for that February meeting, and then we can
So at the
look at
February meeting, because Erica, I thought you said at the February meeting, we should be looking at that study.
if it works.
So we'll do that at the meeting in February.
Yeah, I thought that was just something in our last meeting that Sid had brought up, and I don't know if he had wanted to workshop it in January, or thought commissioners
No,
could give us some ideas on it. So I guess that is going to the February meeting then?
I think
It's up to
rather-
you
I don't-
guys.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't
Well,
think we need a
it
whole,
can be part of our agenda, you know, we're hearing it now, so it'll be on the list, and then whatever other items that are on an agenda agenda list for February.
And I guess, and I know Sid brought it up, because he's probably thinking it's gonna be a fairly big discussion.
Mm-hmm.
If we choose not to talk about it in January, it might be the kind of thing where possibly we could get, I think if we got what staff would like to present, sort of pushed out in January, with like clear instructions of saying like, if you have questions now,
in this section, this
ask
section.
them.
Yeah,
so that way you guys and Sid, you can get these back and like not have to wait until February and then field all kinds of questions out of nowhere.
Mhm.
Right? You might be able to
Yeah.
like be efficiently
Mhm.
combine things, that way you
Questions
guys
at a
aren't like
time.
having to do all kinds of extra work, you know?
Yep. Good idea.
It's like we don't wanna do any, I know none of us are keen to be here forever, spinning our wheels, but, you know, having worked with staff on other boards, I'm usually not very keen to ask staff to spin theirs either, so.
well, and I want to spend more time on that report too, so.
just a little rewind, did I hear $2,500 stipend for treasurer? What are the other stipends do we have? Anybody know?
I don't think there are.
We
They're
have
not.
Sid.
No,
We have
that's
seasonal.
almost like $500 a meeting. I think we could find someone, even a professional to come in and do this for us. I mean, and not break the budget, you know?
Yeah, I don't know why it isn't free for staff. Sorry. I don't know why it ever got, was it always a $2,500?
I think it was from day
I
one.
think it was from day one.
This hasn't changed.
Glad we kept up with inflation.
I know.
1991, right?
Well, it sounds like we're getting a heck of a deal now, you know?
It's more than the secretary gets, I know that.
Yeah, right.
By 25.
Not, no extra pay in it.
Yeah.
I still say, you know, let's see if we're comfortable, if you have anybody that, you know, you coming outside the circle of, there's other things they do. I mean, I know she gave a list when she was in the meeting, I don't know if that ended
Well, yeah,
up.
I mean, it's certainly more on going to a meeting. I mean,
Right,
doing all the financial,
Yeah.
that's it.
But if they're
Paying-
paying
That's
bills,
her.
Paying the
the
bills.
checkbook, they're looking
In
at.
addition to the
Yeah,
audit,
in addition to the audit,
that's
and
working
working
with the auditors coming in.
Mhm.
preparing all the financials for them, doing all the work in between. I think she said it was maybe 4 or 5 checks a month, but still, you're still having to do all of the, and then she does obviously prepare the reports for us, but.
I'm not against giving a local person business if that's an avenue that we want to consider. I don't have anybody in
I
mind.
say we see what she recommends and
Yeah.
go from there.
Are there any,
See if we agree.
any workshop dates that anybody wants to throw out there to be considered for the next agenda, if you just let us know? If somebody wants one in March, if you guys want one in another, in between the regular dates,
Yeah.
we're not trying to stuff things into a regular agenda. If the agendas are light, then we'll definitely do that, but that way we're not kicking things down the road that you'd like to workshop because we don't have time in regular meetings and we're not adding any workshop dates.
Typically the first.
Well,
typically the
July and
first
August
Wednesday.
is a big hole, right? So that's a 3-month span. So we should at least do one.
March, maybe.
Well, I mean, unless you guys are like all taking off or something for the summer, or,
I'm doing
Oh,
May, June,
do it in
July.
summer.
I mean, because we have a meeting in
July.
June and then the next one's in September.
Right.
So that should be a given, one in between there somewhere should always be a LAWPC workshop. I mean,
Yeah,
Fine
and there's
with the
always
boat
a
trip.
chance people
3
aren't
months
here,
between
With a boat trip, sorry, just adding that in.
boat trip.
Well, we did that.
We do need to learn the
We'll
lake.
take the pontoon boat out, we'll do it on the lake.
Yes, yes,
Well,
yeah.
they used to do that, Kevin.
We can
So
do
they,
it.
Auburn Water used to host measuring of the lake.
Oh, yeah.
They no longer have it.
That's right.
See, Steve and I know.
But we can't do, if we do workshops where we need to be aware that it is a public meeting, we need to
Right.
give public notice, we need to do that. And we did that on the Spring Road, and we did that for Forestry.
Oh, yeah.
So just keep that in mind. We definitely can do it, but just want to make sure that we're accessing areas that are appropriate. We don't have members of the public going someplace where we haven't vetted them out. Okay? So, and likewise, if anybody would like a tour of the drinking water treatment plant, if you have, we can do that. Chris can take you around, or Erica and I can give you Mike. Mike was our operator up there before he came over to management, so. One-on-one, it's not a formal meeting, we can do that. When we start having formal meetings in some of these areas, we need to vet some people out first.
So would the first Wednesday of March be a typical meeting day?
Our meeting?
Yeah, what's
we
our
meet in
meeting
February.
dates, normal meeting dates?
Well, we're
Sorry.
meeting in February, it's at the bottom of this agenda.
I know.
February 9th is the next meeting.
So it's the second
It's
Wednesday.
it's usually the second Wednesday.
Do we want to pencil in a possible workshop for March 9th or 10th?
What you suggest in January, Evan?
Well, one in March, one in
To
between July.
discuss the report?
No, I was saying if we weren't gonna have one, I think it would just be helpful for staff. If they're able to get materials out, I mean, not, obviously, like, you guys have time constraints, to ask us for our feedback, well, ahead of the meeting, that we commit to doing that instead of waiting until the February meeting to start asking questions.
When is the council going to discuss it? Are they even? I'm kind of
So-
under the impression that,
We were told by the city manager that it'll be brought up next year once the new council was seated, which the new council is seated now. So it's going to be on their agenda to discuss it and to go over the study. But there is going to be no formal presentation of the Lake Auburn study to the council or to the public. It's not currently budgeted for or planned for. So Sid was hoping that we would have, he's given copies of the study to all kinds of different agencies and departments and groups and boards for them to, take a look at. If they have any feedback, get it back. He's just trying to channeling it to some sort of report that's, as the city council reviews this Lake Auburn study, they can see all the feedback that comes back from the commission board, from the water district board, from state agencies, etc. That was the hope. As far as a date, I don't think there's a date
There's
determined
not
yet
a
of when
date.
they're gonna, it's not set in an agenda just yet for them to review that. We were just told next year.
What we can do is for February 19th, we can put on the list and people can take up a vote if they want on any possible dates, but it's like March 9th, May 11th, July 13th, August 10th, October 12th. Those would be the added months in that could possibly be according to the second Wednesday schedule.
And I
We'll
just add
put
March
that
9th,
listed out as
10th.
possible
We
dates or
could do it
anything
Thursday.
else the board would prefer.
Sounds good.
So are we saying March 9th or?
Wednesday's gonna be hard for Camille, other than that.
Oh,
The Wednesday the 9th will be hard for Camille still.
so we could do the,
10th is a Thursday.
did she say what?
The
she
10th, so you could do a Thursday, a Monday, Thursday, or Friday.
So not Tuesday.
I mean, I could do that Thursday, but does anybody have a regular scheduled meeting on that Thursday, March 10th? That's the second Thursday of the month that they know about.
Do you have trustee meetings?
No, third Tuesdays, Wednesdays.
Tuesday. Council meetings are Tuesday.
You guys?
I will have commitments on Thursdays, beginning anywhere between 5 and 5:30, depending on how far I have to drive for the meeting.
Well, I still think workshops can be an hour and a half. We're pretty close,
I agree.
pretty close, really.
And if you change the day, it's gonna be difficult for somebody.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, right? It doesn't matter what we do.
You'll give an example of that tonight.
Yeah.
So we're not picking a date?
We're not setting a date on the 9th
Okay.
yet, but just putting it on the agenda for the February meeting.
Okay.
And then probably maybe ask you guys to look at what would be the top couple choices of what that workshop should be. Wrap us up, I guess, you guys. Thanks, it was a great conversation. I appreciate
Thank you.
workshops a lot more to know everybody.
Anybody else got anything? We ran over 10 minutes.
That's it.
Now.
But I just have a lot to do.
Thank you.